Under a crystal chandelier, she glided in black, invisible hands, steady, eyes down, heartbeat counting seconds. A subtle wave from the older woman drew her closer. She signed. The room hushed. Phone buzzed. A photo, timestamp 9:11 p.m. Across the street, red dots centered on her. One invitation. 24 hours. Doors closed behind her. Some moments change everything forever. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor of Romano's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, where secrets were served alongside 7-course meals. Emma Rodriguez adjusted her black uniform for the 4th time that evening, her fingers trembling not from nervousness about serving the city's elite, but from the weight of pretending to be someone she wasn't. At 26, she had mastered the art of invisibility, moving through the dining room like smoke with a practiced smile that revealed nothing. "Table 9 needs their champagne topped off," whispered Sarah, the head waitress, her voice barely audible above the soft jazz. "And whatever you do, don't make eye contact with Vincent Torino tonight. He's already sent 2 waitresses home this week for looking at him wrong." Emma nodded, reaching for the bottle of Dom Perignon that cost more than she earned in 2 months. Vincent Torino. Even his name carried weight in this city. Old money, new violence. The kind of power that made politicians bow their heads and judges forget their principles. She had been serving his table for 4 months now, and he had never once acknowledged her existence beyond the occasional grunt of approval when his glass remained full. The dining room hummed with conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes, the gentle murmur of people who had never worried about rent, about medicine they couldn't afford, about choosing between heating and eating. Emma knew that world intimately. She had lived in it once, in what felt like someone else's lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now served the very people who had once welcomed her into their circles. "Miss." The voice cut through her thoughts like broken glass, deep, commanding with the kind of authority that came from never being denied. She turned to find Vincent Torino standing closer than she expected, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach clench. He was shorter than most people imagined, but his presence filled the space around him like spilled ink. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, probably Italian, definitely expensive. Everything about him screamed power and careful control. "Your champagne, sir," Emma said softly, lifting the bottle with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the way her pulse had spiked. "Not for me." Vincent gestured toward the elegant woman sitting at the corner table, partially hidden by the restaurant's careful lighting. "My mother. She's been trying to get your attention for the past 15 minutes. Emma's gaze shifted to the woman, and her breath caught. Mrs. Torino was probably in her early 70s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. She was making subtle hand gestures, her face bright with hopeful expectation. Without thinking, Emma set the champagne bottle on the nearest surface and approached the table. "Good evening," she signed, her hands moving with fluid precision. "How may I assist you?" The transformation in Mrs. Torino's face was immediate and radiant. Her hands danced as she responded, "Oh, how wonderful. I wanted to tell you that the ossobuco reminds me of a dish I had in Milano 40 years ago. Could you please give my compliments to the chef?" "Of course," Emma signed back, genuinely smiling for the first time all evening. "Would you like me to ask him about the preparation? I believe he uses a special wine reduction." Behind her, the restaurant had grown noticeably quieter, but Emma was focused entirely on Mrs. Torino's animated response about her travels through Italy, and how few people took the time to really communicate with her anymore. The older woman's hands moved gracefully as she shared stories of her late husband's courtship, conducted entirely in stolen moments and secret letters because her father disapproved of his family's background. "You sign beautifully," Mrs. Torino continued. "Where did you learn?" "I studied linguistics at NYU," Emma replied automatically, then froze as she realized what she had just revealed. Mrs. Torino's eyebrows rose with interest, but it was the sharp intake of breath behind her that made Emma's blood turn cold. Linguistics. Vincent's voice was soft, almost conversational, but Emma caught the steel beneath the silk. "NYU has an excellent program. What was your focus?" Emma turned slowly, her mind racing through possible responses that wouldn't shatter the carefully constructed identity she had built over the past 3 years. Vincent was studying her with the same intensity he might use to evaluate a business proposition, his dark eyes missing nothing. "Romance languages, sir. Nothing particularly advanced." The lie came smoothly, practiced from months of deflecting personal questions. But Vincent's expression suggested he wasn't buying the deflection. He stepped closer, close enough that Emma could smell his expensive cologne, something subtle and dangerous that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Romance languages," he repeated, his tone suggesting he was testing the words. "And yet you communicate with my mother like you've been signing for years. That's not something you pick up from a few elective courses." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable, and Emma felt the familiar panic beginning to rise in her chest. She had been so careful for so long, and now one moment of genuine human connection had cracked her carefully constructed facade. Mrs. Torino was watching their exchange with obvious fascination, her intelligent eyes moving between her son and Emma like she was witnessing something significant. She signed something quickly to Vincent, who glanced at her with a frown. "What did she say?" Emma asked, grateful for the momentary distraction. "She said you're nervous and I'm making you uncomfortable." Vincent's voice carried a note of something that might have been regret. "She also said I should stop interrogating you and ask you to join us for dinner instead." The invitation hung in the air between them like a trap. Emma could feel the eyes of other diners on them now, could sense Sarah hovering anxiously nearby, probably calculating how much trouble Emma was about to cause for the restaurant. "That's very kind, but I should return to work," Emma said quietly, reaching for the champagne bottle. Vincent caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her movement. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested he had felt it too. "My mother doesn't extend invitations lightly," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow felt more dangerous than when he had been questioning her. "She's particular about the people she likes. And she likes you." Emma looked down at his hand on her wrist, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails, the thin white scar across his knuckles that spoke of violence in his past. When she looked back up, his expression had shifted into something almost vulnerable. "Your mother is lovely," she said softly. "She was telling me about her travels to Italy. She has wonderful stories." "She does." Vincent released her wrist but didn't step back. "She doesn't share them with many people. Most people smile and nod when they realize she's deaf, then find excuses to walk away." The observation carried more pain than Emma would have expected from a man with his reputation. "Maybe they're afraid," she said without thinking. "People often fear what they don't understand. And you? Are you afraid?" The question was asked quietly, but Emma caught the weight behind it. Vincent Torino was not a man who asked casual questions. Everything about him suggested someone who measured words and responses, who collected information the way other people collected art. "Of you?" Emma met his gaze directly. "Should I be?" For a moment something passed between them that had nothing to do with his reputation or her disguise. Something raw and honest that made Emma's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Then Vincent smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face from something hard and calculating into something almost boyish. "That depends," he said, his voice carrying a hint of humor that surprised her. "How do you feel about family dinners with complicated people?" Before Emma could respond, Mrs. Torino tapped the table gently, drawing their attention. She signed something to Vincent, her expression mischievous. "What did she say now?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew. "She said I'm being obvious, and you're both making this more difficult than it needs to be." Vincent's smile widened. "She also said that if I don't ask you properly, she's going to be very disappointed in how I was raised." Emma felt a laugh bubble up despite her anxiety. "And how were you raised, Mr. Torino?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, more personal than anything she had dared ask him before. Vincent's expression grew thoughtful, his eyes taking on a distant quality that suggested he was remembering something both painful and precious. "To respect family above everything else," he said finally. "To protect the people who matter, and to recognize when someone unexpected walks into your life." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the armor she had built around herself over the past 3 years. Vincent Torino was supposed to be dangerous, untouchable, the kind of man who destroyed lives without a second thought. He wasn't supposed to speak about family with that particular mix of reverence and vulnerability that made her forget who he was. what he represented. "I should really get back to work," Emma said. But the words lacked conviction. She could feel Sarah's anxious gaze from across the dining room, could sense the other waitstaff watching this unprecedented interaction between their most powerful customer and the girl who usually blended into the background like wallpaper. Vincent studied her face with uncomfortable intensity, his dark eyes seeming to catalog every micro-expression, every tell. "You're scared," he observed quietly. "Not of me, of something else." The accuracy of his assessment made Emma's pulse spike. How had he read her so easily when she had spent years perfecting the art of appearing unremarkable? "I'm not scared," she lied, lifting her chin with a defiance that surprised them both. "I'm careful. There's a difference." "Is there?" Vincent stepped closer, close enough that Emma could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could count the subtle lines that suggested he smiled more than his reputation indicated. "Because from where I'm standing, careful looks a lot like running." The observation hit too close to home. Emma had been running for 3 years from a life that had been systematically destroyed by someone she had trusted completely, running from a past that followed her like a shadow, from mistakes that had cost her everything she had worked to build. Mrs. Torino cleared her throat softly, drawing their attention back to the table. She signed something to Vincent, her expression knowing and slightly amused. "What did she say?" Emma asked, grateful for the interruption. "She said we're both being stubborn and she's tired of watching us dance around whatever this is." Vincent's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "She also said that dinner is getting cold, and in her experience, important conversations should never happen on an empty stomach." Emma felt a laugh escape despite her anxiety. Mrs. Torino was watching her with the kind of maternal warmth that Emma hadn't experienced in years, the sort of gentle persistence that wore down defenses without force. "I really can't," Emma began, but Mrs. Torino was already signing to her, her hands moving with elegant insistence. "She's not asking," Vincent translated, though Emma had understood perfectly. "She's informing you that you're joining us, and arguing with an Italian grandmother is generally considered a losing proposition." The casual way he said Italian grandmother made something twist in Emma's stomach, not because of the cultural reference, but because of the warmth in his voice when he spoke about his mother, the obvious affection that transformed his features from sharp and calculating to something softer, more human. "Mr. Torino." Sarah appeared beside them, her professional smile stretched thin with anxiety. "Is everything satisfactory? Can we bring anything else for your table?" Vincent's attention shifted to Sarah, and Emma watched his expression change like a mask sliding into place. The warmth disappeared, replaced by the cold politeness of a man accustomed to absolute authority. "Actually, yes, Emma will be joining us for dinner. Please have someone cover her tables." "Of course, sir. Right away." Sarah's relief was palpable, but Emma caught the confusion in her eyes as she glanced between Vincent and Emma. This wasn't how their world worked. Powerful men didn't invite waitresses to dinner, didn't blur the careful lines that kept their universe in order. As Sarah hurried away, Emma felt the weight of the moment settling around her like a trap. She was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed, to step into a world where her carefully constructed anonymity would be impossible to maintain. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Before I sit down, before this goes any further, I'm not who you think I am." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that suggested her words hadn't surprised him. "And who do you think I think you are?" The question was typical of him, Emma realized, answering questions with questions, never revealing more than necessary. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Someone simple, someone who belongs in this uniform, serving wine and taking orders. Someone who doesn't have secrets that could complicate your life." "Everyone has secrets, Emma." Vincent's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "The question is whether those secrets are worth protecting or worth running from." He paused, his gaze never leaving her face. "And whether you trust me enough to let me help you figure out which is which." The offer was both tempting and terrifying. Emma had spent 3 years trusting no one, relying only on herself, building walls that kept everyone at a safe distance. But standing here, looking into Vincent's eyes, she felt those walls beginning to crack. "Mrs. Torino reached out and gently touched Emma's hand, her touch warm and reassuring. When Emma looked down, the older woman was signing, "He's a good man. Complicated, but good. Give him a chance." "I can see what she's saying," Vincent said dryly. And before you ask, yes, she's been trying to fix my social life for years, usually with less success. Emma felt another laugh threaten to escape. The situation was surreal, almost absurd. Here she was, being courted by one of the most dangerous men in the city, while his deaf mother played matchmaker in sign language. This is insane, she murmured, more to herself than to either of them. Probably, Vincent agreed. But most of the best things in life are a little insane. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out what happens next. He extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation and a challenge. Have dinner with us, Emma. Let my mother tell you embarrassing stories about my childhood. Let me get to know the woman who speaks 5 languages but pretends to be invisible. Emma stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp reminder of the reality she was trying to escape. Unknown number. The text made her blood turn cold. Still hiding, I see, but not very well. Emma's face must have gone white because Vincent's expression immediately sharpened. What is it? Nothing, Emma said quickly, shoving her phone back into her pocket. Just a spam message. But Vincent was already moving, his hand touching the small of her back as he guided her toward his table. Sit, he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. And let me worry about whatever that message said. Emma wanted to protest, to insist that she could handle her own problems, but the truth was that she had been handling them alone for 3 years and making very little progress. The exhaustion of constant vigilance, of always looking over her shoulder, was wearing her down in ways she was only beginning to understand. Mrs. Torino patted the chair beside her, signing, You look pale, dear. Sit and eat something. Food helps everything. Vincent remained standing, his eyes scanning the restaurant with the practiced alertness of someone accustomed to threat assessment. Emma realized that his casual invitation to dinner had shifted into something else, something protective and potentially dangerous. Vincent, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time. You don't understand what you're getting involved in. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Then explain it to me. The simple request hung between them, laden with possibility and peril. Emma knew that once she started talking, once she opened the door to her past, there would be no closing it again. But looking at Vincent, seeing the steady determination in his eyes, she realized that maybe for the first time in 3 years she didn't want to close that door. Maybe she was tired of running. Emma's hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket again, staring at the message that had turned her blood to ice. The words blurred as she read them a second time, confirming what she already knew. After 3 years of careful hiding, of building a new identity from nothing, he had found her. Vincent was watching her with the sharp attention of a predator who had scented blood, his dark eyes missing nothing as they catalogued her fear. Mrs. Torino reached across the table and gently covered Emma's shaking hand with her own, the maternal gesture breaking through Emma's panic like sunlight through storm clouds. Who is he? Vincent asked quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate answers. When Emma hesitated, he leaned forward slightly, his presence both comforting and intimidating. Emma, whoever sent that message knows where you work. That means they've been watching you, probably for some time. This isn't something you handle alone anymore. The casual assumption of protection in his voice should have annoyed her, but instead it made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of constant vigilance alone, always looking over her shoulder, always ready to run. The idea of sharing that burden, even with someone as dangerous as Vincent Torino, was both terrifying and seductive. His name is Michael Chen, Emma said finally, the words feeling like glass in her throat. He was my business partner, my fiancé, the man who destroyed my entire life and convinced everyone I deserved it. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating flickered behind his eyes. What kind of business? Financial consulting. We built a firm together from nothing, specialized in helping small businesses navigate complex regulations and tax structures. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, muscle memory taking over. I developed most of our proprietary software, created the algorithms that made us successful. Michael handled the client relationships and public face of the company. Mrs. Torino was following their conversation through lip reading and context, her intelligent brown eyes moving between them with growing concern. She signed something to Vincent, who nodded grimly before turning back to Emma. What happened? Michael was skimming money from client accounts using our software to hide the transfers in legitimate-looking transactions. When I discovered what he was doing, I confronted him privately first. I thought he would stop, that we could fix it together. Emma's laugh was bitter, self-recriminating. Instead, he turned it around on me, made it look like I was the one stealing, like I had been manipulating the software for my own benefit. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face in a gesture that reminded Emma uncomfortably of how Michael used to sit when he was planning something particularly ruthless. The evidence must have been convincing if he managed to shift blame so completely. Michael was always better at reading people than I was, better at understanding what they wanted to hear. He had 3 years to study our clients, to build relationships, to position himself as the trustworthy face of our partnership. Emma's voice grew quieter, more pained. When the investigation started, he had documentation showing that I had exclusive access to the compromised accounts. He had emails that made it look like I was pressuring him to expand our services into ethically questionable areas. The memory of those emails still made Emma's stomach churn. Michael had been so thorough, so patient in his manipulation. He had saved every conversation where Emma had expressed concerns about their rapid growth, every moment where she had questioned whether they were taking on too much risk. In his hands, her caution became evidence of hidden guilt, her questions proof of criminal intent. The charges were eventually dropped for lack of evidence, but by then the damage was done. No one in the financial sector would touch me. My professional reputation was destroyed, my personal savings depleted by legal fees. Emma met Vincent's eyes directly. Michael kept the company, kept our clients, kept everything we had built together, and I disappeared. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying Emma's face with uncomfortable intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of professional interest that made Emma's pulse spike. Michael Chen. The name sounds familiar. He's expanded significantly since I left. The company is called Chen Financial Solutions now, specializes in cryptocurrency consulting and international tax optimization. Emma couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Built on the foundation of everything I created, everything he stole from me. Mrs. Torino tapped the table gently, drawing their attention. She signed something to Vincent, her expression concerned and maternal. What did she say? Emma asked. She asked if this Michael person is dangerous to you personally, or just professionally. Vincent translated, his tone suggesting he was wondering the same thing. Emma felt heat creep up her neck. The truth was complicated, layered with shame and self-blame that she had never fully processed. Both. Michael doesn't like loose ends, and I represent the biggest loose end of his career. As long as I'm alive, I'm proof that his success is built on theft and manipulation. Vincent's expression hardened into something that reminded Emma exactly who she was talking to. Vincent Torino hadn't built his reputation through kindness or forgiveness. He was a man who understood power, who knew how to eliminate threats with surgical precision. Has he threatened you directly before tonight? Not explicitly, but I've been getting anonymous messages for months. Photos of my apartment building, pictures of me at work, copies of job applications I've submitted. Emma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He's been watching me, making sure I know that he can reach me whenever he wants to. The revelation hung between them like a live wire, crackling with implications that made Emma's skin crawl. She had been so careful, so thorough in creating her new identity, but Michael had resources and connections that she couldn't match. Show me the other messages, Vincent said quietly, extending his hand for her phone. Emma hesitated, knowing that sharing those messages would cross another line, would invite Vincent deeper into a situation that could destroy them both. But the alternative was continuing to face Michael alone, and 3 years of isolation had taught her the limits of her own strength. She scrolled through her phone, pulling up the anonymous numbers and unknown contacts that had been terrorizing her for months. Vincent read in silence, his expression growing darker with each message. These aren't random harassment, he said finally. This is psychological warfare. He's been systematically breaking down your sense of security, making you question whether anywhere is safe. The clinical accuracy of his assessment made Emma feel both validated and terrified. Vincent understood predatory behavior because he lived in a world where it was currency, where the ability to read and manipulate people was a survival skill. Mrs. Torino reached across the table again, taking both of Emma's hands in hers. Her touch was warm, steady, grounding in a way that made Emma want to cry. The older woman signed something, her movements gentle but insistent. "She says you're not alone anymore." Vincent translated. "She says family protects family and you're family now." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Family. When was the last time someone had claimed her, had offered protection without expecting something in return? Michael had weaponized the concept of family against her, using her trust and love as tools for manipulation. "I can't ask you to get involved in this," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what Michael is capable of, what he's willing to do to protect his reputation." Vincent's smile was sharp, predatory, the expression of a man who had faced down threats that would terrify most people. "Emma, I think you're underestimating what I'm capable of, and what I'm willing to do to protect someone who matters to me." The casual possession in his voice should have alarmed her, but instead it made Emma feel something she hadn't experienced in years. Safe. Not just physically protected, but genuinely valued by someone with the power to make that protection meaningful. Before you dive deeper into this story, I want to invite you to become part of our community. If you're captivated by tales of hidden identities, dangerous alliances, and the thin line between protection and possession, subscribe to our channel. We craft these psychological thrillers with the same care that Emma once put into her algorithms. Every detail calculated, every emotion earned. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore the shadows where ordinary people meet extraordinary circumstances. And here's what I'm curious about. If you found yourself in Emma's position, would you trust Vincent's offer of protection? Or would the smart move be to keep running? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights often shape the stories we tell. Vincent's declaration hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat, combined into something Emma couldn't quite categorize. The restaurant continued its elegant dance around them, servers moving with practiced discretion, conversations flowing in muted tones. But Emma felt as though she and Vincent existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Mrs. Torino was watching them both with the satisfied expression of someone whose matchmaking instincts had proven correct, her intelligent eyes missing nothing as they catalogued the subtle shift in dynamics between her son and the young woman who had walked into their lives speaking the language of her heart. "Vincent," Emma said carefully, testing the weight of his name on her tongue, "I need you to understand what you're offering. Michael isn't just some bitter ex-boyfriend with a grudge. He's built an empire on stolen work, and he has connections throughout the financial world, including people who don't ask questions about how problems get solved." She paused, studying his face for any sign of hesitation, any indication that he was beginning to grasp the scope of what he was volunteering for. "He's made it clear that my continued existence is inconvenient for him. That's not a metaphor." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming once against the white tablecloth in a gesture that somehow managed to convey both thought and controlled violence. "Emma, I think you're operating under some misconceptions about who you're talking to." His voice was quiet, conversational, but there was something underneath it that made the hair on the back of Emma's neck stand up. Michael Chen might be dangerous in the corporate world, but that's a very limited sphere of influence. I operate in a much broader environment. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather or the wine selection, made Emma's mouth go dry. "You're talking about," she began, then stopped, suddenly aware that finishing the sentence would make certain truths explicit that were currently only implied. Vincent's smile was sharp, amused by her sudden reticence. "I'm talking about protecting someone who matters to me from someone who has already proven he's willing to destroy innocent people for profit. The methods I use are less important than the results I achieve." Mrs. Torino had been following their conversation through lip reading and context clues, and she chose that moment to tap the table gently, drawing their attention. She signed something to Vincent, her expression simultaneously fond and exasperated. "What did she say?" Emma asked, grateful for the interruption that broke the mounting tension. "She said I'm being dramatic and scaring you unnecessarily. She also said that actions speak louder than threats, and I should focus on making sure you feel safe instead of making speeches about how dangerous I can be." Vincent's expression softened as he translated his mother's words, the hard edges of his face relaxing into something more human. "She's usually right about these things." Emma felt a laugh bubble up despite the gravity of their conversation. Mrs. Torino's practical wisdom cut through the posturing and intimidation like a knife through silk, reducing complex power dynamics to simple human needs. "Your mother is very wise," Emma signed to the older woman, who beamed with pleasure at the compliment. She raised a complicated son, but she did her best. Mrs. Torino signed back, her hands moving with graceful humor. Though I think he's finally found someone who might be able to keep up with him. I can see what she's saying, Vincent said dryly. And I'll remind her later that subtlety was supposed to be part of Italian grandmother training. But his tone was affectionate, and Emma caught the way his expression softened when he looked at his mother. Whatever else Vincent Torino might be, whatever darkness lived in the corners of his life, his love for his mother was genuine and uncomplicated. It was the first entirely clean emotion Emma had seen from him, and it made her chest tighten with something dangerously close to trust. Emma's phone buzzed again, cutting through the moment like a blade. This time, the message made her blood turn cold for an entirely different reason. It wasn't text, but a photo. Emma at work, taken from outside the restaurant, the image sharp enough to show her face clearly through the window. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than an hour ago. "He's here," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "Michael's here, somewhere nearby." Vincent was moving before she finished speaking, his hand already reaching into his jacket in a gesture that was casual but unmistakably purposeful. "Show me," he said quietly, his tone carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. Emma handed him her phone, watching as his expression grew progressively darker. This was taken from the building across the street. Good angle, expensive equipment. He's either very prepared or he's working with professionals. Mrs. Torino was looking between them with growing alarm, her maternal instincts clearly picking up on the shift in atmosphere even without understanding the details. Vincent said something to her in rapid Italian, his voice low and reassuring, but Emma caught the underlying tension. "What did you tell her?" Emma asked. "That we might need to leave soon, and she should be ready to go home." Vincent's eyes were scanning the restaurant now, cataloging exits and potential threats with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to danger. "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. We're going to finish this conversation, but not here. Too many civilians, too many variables I can't control." The casual way he dismissed the other diners as civilians sent a chill down Emma's spine. It was a reminder that Vincent lived in a world where ordinary people were collateral damage, where violence was a tool rather than a last resort. "Where?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Somewhere Michael can't follow without revealing more than he's prepared to lose." Vincent's smile was cold, predatory. "Somewhere I have advantages he can't match or buy." Emma felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that had no bottom. Once she went with Vincent, once she accepted his protection, there would be no going back to her carefully constructed life of invisibility. She would be stepping into his world completely, with all the dangers and moral compromises that entailed. But the alternative was facing Michael alone, and 3 years of running had taught her that some enemies couldn't be escaped, only confronted. "What about your mother?" Emma asked, glancing at Mrs. Torino, who was watching their exchange with the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades reading between the lines of dangerous conversations. "She goes home with protection. This doesn't touch her." Vincent's voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of a man accustomed to making life-and-death decisions without hesitation. "My mother has lived through worse than Michael Chen, but I don't take unnecessary risks with family." Mrs. Torino reached across the table and took Emma's hand again, squeezing gently. She signed something, her movements slow and deliberate. "She says she's not worried about herself," Vincent translated. "She's worried about you. She says you look like someone who's been carrying the world alone for too long, and it's time to let someone else help." The observation was so accurate, so painfully precise, that Emma felt tears threaten for the second time that evening. "I don't know how to stop running," Emma admitted quietly, the words feeling like a confession. "It's the only thing I've known how to do for 3 years." Vincent's expression grew gentle, almost tender, a stark contrast to the dangerous energy that had been radiating from him moments before. "Then it's time to learn how to fight instead." He stood up, extending his hand to her once again. "Trust me, Emma. Let me show you what it feels like to stop being afraid." Emma stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything. Her phone buzzed again. Another photo, this one taken from a different angle, showing Vincent's profile clearly. Michael wasn't just watching her anymore. He was studying her new allies, calculating threats and opportunities with the same methodical precision he had once used to steal her life's work. The choice was no longer between safety and danger. It was between facing danger alone or facing it with someone who understood how to win. Emma took Vincent's hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his skin, the steady strength that spoke of someone who had never backed down from a fight. "Okay," she said quietly. "Show me." Vincent's smile was fierce, triumphant, the expression of a predator who had just claimed something precious. "Good girl," he said, his voice carrying approval and something darker. "Let's go teach Michael Chen what happens when he threatens my family." The black sedan that pulled up to Romano's rear entrance was the kind of vehicle that whispered wealth and power without ostentation. Emma found herself seated between Vincent and Mrs. Torino, the older woman's presence both comforting and surreal as they glided through Manhattan's evening traffic. Vincent had made 3 phone calls during the short walk from the restaurant, each conversation conducted in rapid Italian that Emma couldn't follow, but understood instinctively was about her protection. The efficiency with which he had orchestrated their departure spoke of someone accustomed to managing complex situations under pressure. "Where are we going?" Emma asked quietly, watching the familiar streets of her carefully constructed life disappear behind them. Vincent's hand found hers in the darkness of the back seat, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was both possessive and reassuring. "Somewhere Michael can't reach you without declaring war on my family." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as though discussing dinner plans rather than the potential for violence. "My home has certain advantages that your apartment lacks." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The casual way Vincent spoke about warfare, about advantages and territories, reminded her that she was stepping into a world where conflicts were resolved through methods that existed outside legal frameworks. "What kind of advantages?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "Security systems that governments would envy, personnel who understand discretion, and enough legal insulation to ensure that whatever happens next, you won't be the one facing consequences." Mrs. Torino squeezed Emma's other hand, signing something in the dim light of the sedan's interior. "She says you look terrified," Vincent translated, his tone gentling. "She wants you to know that we don't hurt innocent people. Our family has rules, boundaries that we don't cross." The qualification in his words wasn't lost on Emma. Innocent people were protected, but those who threatened the family operated under different rules entirely. "And Michael?" Emma asked. "Where does he fall in that calculation?" Vincent's smile was sharp, cold, the expression of someone who had made peace with violence long ago. "Michael forfeited any claim to protection the moment he started hunting you. He's made his choice. Now he lives with the consequences." The finality in his voice made Emma's stomach clench. She had wanted protection, had dreamed of someone powerful enough to make Michael back down, but the reality of Vincent's methods was more brutal than she had anticipated. The sedan turned into a private driveway that seemed to stretch forever, lined with mature trees that blocked out the city lights. Emma caught glimpses of discreet security cameras, motion sensors, barriers that could stop a vehicle without appearing overtly threatening. Vincent's home emerged from the darkness like something from a movie, all clean lines and understated elegance that whispered old money and older power. "It's beautiful," Emma said honestly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was entering a fortress disguised as a residence. "It's safe," Vincent replied, which told Emma everything she needed to know about his priorities. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of posture that suggested military training. "Mrs. Torino," she said warmly, embracing Vincent's mother with genuine affection. "And you must be Emma. I'm Maria, the house manager. Mr. Vincent has told me so much about you." Emma wondered exactly what Vincent had said during those phone calls, how much of her situation Maria understood. The older woman's knowing smile suggested she was familiar with providing sanctuary for people fleeing dangerous situations. "Maria has been with our family for 18 years, Vincent explained as they moved through the foyer. "She understands discretion, and she's dealt with more complicated situations than yours." The interior of Vincent's home was a study in controlled elegance. Expensive without being ostentatious, comfortable without sacrificing the underlying sense of power that seemed to permeate everything he touched. Mrs. Torino signed something to Vincent, gesturing toward a sitting room that looked like it had been designed for intimate conversations. "She wants to talk to Emma alone for a few minutes." Vincent translated, his expression suggesting he wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. "It's fine," Emma said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Mrs. Torino's presence had been the one constant source of comfort in an evening full of revelations and threats. "I think I'd like that too." Vincent studied her face for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll be in my study making some calls. Maria will show you the way when you're ready." He paused at the doorway, his dark eyes meeting Emma's with an intensity that made her pulse spike. "Emma, whatever my mother tells you about me, remember that some stories are more complicated than they appear." Once they were alone, Mrs. Torino settled into one of the leather chairs with the grace of someone completely at home in elegant surroundings. She gestured for Emma to sit across from her, then began signing with the fluid precision Emma had noticed at the restaurant. "You're frightened of my son," she said, her hands moving with gentle certainty. "Not because you think he'll hurt you, but because you're afraid of what accepting his protection might cost you." The observation was so accurate that Emma felt exposed, as though Mrs. Torino could see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "I don't know how to be someone's responsibility," Emma signed back, the words feeling like a confession. "I've been taking care of myself for so long that I don't know how to let someone else make decisions for me." Mrs. Torino nodded with understanding that spoke of personal experience. "Vincent is not an easy man to love," she replied. "He sees the world in terms of threats and assets, problems and solutions. But underneath all that calculation, he has the heart of a protector." "How do you know?" Emma asked. "How can you be sure that I'm not just another problem for him to solve?" Mrs. Torino's smile was warm, maternal, filled with decades of observing her son's patterns and relationships. "Because I've never seen him bring someone home before. Vincent keeps his personal life and his business completely separate. For him to invite you here, to involve you with family, means you've already become something more than a problem to be solved." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, hope and terror warring in her chest. She had spent 3 years believing herself to be fundamentally damaged, unmarketable in terms of personal relationships because of the wreckage Michael had made of her life. The idea that Vincent might see her as something precious rather than merely pitiable was both intoxicating and terrifying. "What if I disappoint him?" Emma signed, voicing fears she had barely acknowledged to herself. "What if I'm not strong enough for his world?" Mrs. Torino reached across the small table between them, taking Emma's hands in hers with the same gentle authority she had displayed at the restaurant. "Strength isn't about never being afraid," she signed slowly, deliberately. "It's about choosing to stand and fight even when you're terrified. You've been doing that for 3 years, surviving on your own, rebuilding your life from nothing. Vincent recognizes that kind of strength because he has it too." Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time the message was different, more direct, carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who had grown tired of subtle intimidation. "Stop hiding behind new friends, Emma. You know this ends only one way. You can make it easy on everyone involved, or you can make it difficult, your choice. You have 24 hours to decide." Emma's hands shook as she showed the message to Mrs. Torino, who read it with the grim expression of someone familiar with threats and ultimatums. "Show Vincent," Mrs. Torino signed immediately. "This is no longer about protection. This is about war." Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. The game had changed, shifted from psychological manipulation to direct confrontation. Michael was forcing a resolution, banking on her fear and isolation to make her surrender without a fight. But as she sat in Vincent's elegant living room, surrounded by the quiet efficiency of his protection, Emma realized that she was no longer the same broken woman who had fled New York 3 years ago. Vincent appeared in the doorway as though summoned by some invisible signal, his expression sharpening as he took in their faces. "What happened?" Emma handed him her phone without speaking, watching as his features hardened into something that belonged more to boardrooms where life and death decisions were made than to comfortable family homes. 24 hours, he said quietly, his tone carrying the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Michael's getting impatient." "What does that mean?" Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew. "It means he's planning to force a confrontation whether we're ready or not." Vincent's smile was sharp, predatory, the expression of someone who had never backed down from a challenge. "Fortunately for us, I prefer to control the timing and location of my conflicts." He moved to the window, checking the security displays with practiced efficiency. Emma, tomorrow morning, Michael Chen is going to discover that hunting my family was the biggest mistake of his career. As Vincent began making calls to people whose names Emma didn't recognize but whose voices carried the kind of authority that suggested they were accustomed to solving problems through methods that existed outside legal frameworks, she realized that her carefully constructed life of invisibility was truly over. There would be no more running, no more hiding, no more pretending to be someone ordinary. Tomorrow, she would discover whether Vincent's protection was worth the price of entering his world completely. Mrs. Torino took her hand again, squeezing gently. "Welcome to the family," she signed with a smile that was both warm and slightly sad. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." Emma squeezed back, drawing comfort from the older woman's steady presence, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Ready or not, there was no turning back now. If this story resonated with you, if you found yourself questioning what you would do in Emma's position, I want you to know that you're not just watching a story unfold. You're part of a community that values complex characters and moral ambiguity. Subscribe to our channel and join thousands of viewers who appreciate psychological thrillers that don't offer easy answers. We're building something special here, a place where stories challenge you to think rather than simply entertain. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our family. What did you think of Emma's choice? Was she right to trust Vincent, or should she have kept running? And more importantly, what would you have done in her place? Let me know in the comments. Your perspectives often inspire the stories we tell next.